They say silence is golden. But in corporate America, silence can be a cage, one they paint gold so you'll thank them for locking you inside it. That Tuesday morning, the office smelled like ambition and burnt coffee. The kind of smell that clings to polyester suits and fluorescent dreams. I'd been up since 5, double-checking the deck for the leadership meeting I'd organized. Every chart aligned, every color-coded cell perfect. 6 months of tracking productivity trends. 6 months of building something I believed would finally prove I was ready for that promotion. The conference room glass gleamed like water. You could see every reflection, every smile that didn't reach the eyes, every tap of a polished shoe on the carpet. My manager, Brad, liked to keep the lights a little dim in there. Said it made people comfortable. But really, it made it easier to hide things. At 9:45, I stood by the door with my tablet, ready to present. My notes were clear, my confidence steady. I could already hear my grandmother's voice in my head. Do it with grace, baby. Always with grace. 7s. Then I noticed the chairs were full. All except one. Mine. Brad was at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, smile rehearsed. Around him sat the rest of the leadership team, flipping through printed copies of my presentation. My name wasn't on the cover. The watermark that said, "Prepared by A. Brooks," had vanished. I blinked once, twice. Thought maybe I'd misremembered. But then I heard it. My own data, my own words, coming from Brad's mouth like he'd written them in his sleep. "Productivity's up 22% this quarter," he said. I took the initiative to restructure the performance metrics myself. My fingers tightened around the tablet. That wasn't initiative. That was theft dressed in a tie. Through the glass, I could see the reflection of my own face, expression still calm, but my pulse loud enough to fill the silence. One of the senior managers leaned toward him, impressed. "Brad, that's solid work," he said. "You really brought this team together." 7s. Brad chuckled, humble on the surface. "It's about knowing how to motivate the right people. Some have potential. Others need a little more polish." 7s. A few eyes flicked toward the hallway, toward me, but not long enough to matter. My throat felt dry. I didn't move, didn't knock, didn't interrupt. Because at that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. You can't confront a system that feeds off your reaction. You have to let it eat, then starve it from within. So I watched. Every nod, every lie, every laugh. Memorized how it felt to disappear in plain sight. When the meeting ended, I waited until the last voice faded. The glass door opened. Brad stepped out, surprised to see me standing there. "Ayana," he said with that plastic smile. "Didn't realize you were waiting. Everything okay?" 7s. I smiled back. "Perfectly." 7s. He nodded, already halfway down the hall. "We'll talk soon. I've got some feedback for you. Just little things about communication style. Leadership presence." 7s. Leadership presence. That phrase hit like a paper cut. Small, sharp, invisible. Inside, I heard a voice I'd buried deep whisper. "They will always find a name for your fire when they fear your light." I walked back to my desk, every heel click measured, controlled. Around me, the office buzzed like nothing happened. Emails, laughter, the low hum of printers. Ordinary life. I sat down, opened my inbox. No meeting invite. No acknowledgement. Just a corporate newsletter about Diversity Week, The irony made me laugh, quietly, without humor. That night, I stayed late under the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The janitor vacuumed 2 rows away. My reflection on the monitor looked tired but awake in a way it hadn't been before. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just whispered to myself, "All right, then, let's play your game." Because in that moment, I understood something new. If they could erase my name from my work, I could write it somewhere they couldn't touch. And that was the night everything began to shift. Would you walk away or fight back? Tell me in the comments, hey, thought I'd fade quietly. That I'd come in the next morning with a polite smile and a Starbucks cup, pretending nothing happened. They don't know me. They don't know Ayana Brooks. For 3 days, I said nothing. Not a word. I just observed. Watched who lingered near Brad's desk, who copied on his emails, who looked away too quickly when I entered the break room. Silence became my weapon, and data, my blade. As HR, I had access. Not to everything, but to enough. Payroll, bonuses, performance logs, the kind of numbers that tell stories people don't say out loud. On the 3rd night, when the office emptied and the air smelled of carpet cleaner and ambition gone stale, I stayed. I opened the restricted system under my credentials. Every click echoed like a heartbeat. 100 to 20, Sears. 118, Dean Tears. 124, 500, names I knew, faces I smiled at every day. Then there was me, 91, URLers. Same role, same metrics, different gender, different shade of skin. And below that, hidden under MISC, bonus adjustments. Vince, I saw Brad's name. 12 unreported transactions in the past year. All labeled performance retention. All signed by himself. I leaned back, staring at the screen. The numbers didn't lie, but they whispered something ugly. That leadership was never about merit here. It was about mirrors. Reflect the right image, and you get the crown. The AC buzzed overhead. The lights flickered once. That corporate hum that makes everything feel colder than it is. I heard my mother's voice, calm but sharp. Sevens, baby, you can't fight power with rage. You fight it with receipts. Sevens. So I made copies. Every line, every figure. Encrypted, time-stamped, secured on an external drive that looked like an ordinary lipstick case. I carried it home in my purse, a secret weight against my hip. At home, my apartment was silent except for the city outside, Atlanta at midnight, restless and alive. I sat by the window, screen glowing on my face. A folder titled Project Mirror. And for a second, my hand trembled. I wasn't scared. I was awake. Every year, every maybe next time, every fake compliment, all of it was fuel now. The next morning, Brad stopped by my cubicle, coffee in hand. "Ayana, hey," he said, casual as ever. "About yesterday. Don't take it personal, okay? Leadership just needs to see more collaboration, less tension." "Seventh?" I smiled. "Of course. Brad, I understand completely." "Seventh?" He grinned, relief flashing across his face. And I thought, of course you'd believe me. You've spent your whole career believing women like me won't bite. That afternoon, I received the official email. Sevens, Ayana, we appreciate your continued commitment to growth. You'll remain in your current position this cycle. Let's revisit in 6 months. Vince? 6 months. The same phrase they'd used for 2 years. The same way they kept women like me busy climbing a ladder missing rungs. So I made a plan. Not loud. Not obvious. A quiet, perfect kind of vengeance. The kind that leaves fingerprints made of truth. Be honest. What would you do if it was you sitting in that room? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear you. The night before Diversity Day, the office was a skeleton. Empty desks, flickering monitors, the faint smell of lemon cleaner. I stayed late again, pretending to finish reports. At 3:42 a.m., the server room was empty, humming like a sleeping beast. I uploaded the file. A single document. Encrypted. Auto-routed to every executive inbox, CEO included. Subject line: Payroll discrepancies. Unreported compensation and gender gap summary. Sevens. No signature. Just data. Just truth. Then I went home. Made tea. Sat by the window and watched the sunrise cut through the Atlanta skyline like a blade. By 9:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. Brad's voice on voicemail, shaky. Ayana, can you come in early? There's been a situation. Sevens. I smiled. I took my time. When I arrived, the energy in the office was different. Too quiet. People whispering near the copy room, eyes wide, pretending to work. Brad's door was closed. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures, the CEO and our legal head. Minutes later, Brad came out, face pale, tie undone. He didn't look at me, just kept walking. Out the door. Security followed. I sat down at my desk, calm. The CEO called me in not long after. Ayana, she said, eyes sharp. You didn't send that file, did you? Sevens. I held her gaze. I believe transparency is key, ma'am, especially before Diversity Day. Sevens. Silence. Then, Sevens. A slow, almost reluctant smile. Well, she said, transparency seems to have done its job. Sevens. That afternoon, a company-wide memo went out. Sevens. Effective immediately. Leadership changes will be implemented. A comprehensive audit of compensation practices is underway. Sevens. They called it reform. I called it balance. Later, when the lights dimmed and the last applause from the Diversity Day speech faded, I stayed by the window again, watching my reflection in the glass, tired but whole. They called me too assertive. Sevens. Too ambitious. Too much. But I was never too much. I was just precise. And precision, when you're underestimated. Sevens is the sharpest form of power there is. The office never sounded the same after that day. There used to be a rhythm, printers humming, phones ringing, the low chatter of people pretending they had purpose. Now there was silence, a thick, fragile kind of quiet, like everyone was waiting for permission to breathe. They never mentioned my name in the official memo, but everyone knew. When I walked past the hallway, conversations broke mid-sentence. Some looked at me with awe, others with fear. A few smiled, small and careful. The smiles were small, careful, almost imperceptible at first, an upturned corner of a mouth, a subtle nod, a glance that lingered just a fraction longer than it should have. The kind that said, "Thank you," without words. Not just gratitude, but recognition. Recognition that someone had seen, remembered, and respected the effort, the struggle, the nights spent alone in fluorescent-lit cubicles with nothing but a monitor and determination as company. I noticed it in the way a colleague paused mid-email, eyes catching mine before they returned to their screen. I noticed it in the way someone lingered a little longer near the copy room, pretending to check prints while really just observing. These tiny acknowledgments were louder than any official praise, more satisfying than any corporate memo could ever be. And then it hit me with clarity. Revenge doesn't echo loudly. It doesn't parade itself across the office with fanfare or noise. It doesn't demand recognition. It ripples quietly, subtly, invisibly, through eyes, through whispers, through the soft shift in posture when people start to carry themselves differently, when they hold their heads higher, when they stop doubting their own worth because they've seen someone else claim theirs. The effect is not immediate. It grows over time, a current that changes the atmosphere of a room without anyone noticing until they're standing taller, more certain, more aware. Brad never came back. Not a call, not a word, not a forced apology. Rumor had it he'd been offered a mutual separation package, packaged neatly with HR's rehearsed language and legal approval. The CEO called it a graceful exit. I called it gravity. Because no matter how high someone rises when built on deceit, when the weight of truth is finally applied, everything that is unsupported falls. Every lie eventually falls, every inflated ego comes back to earth, and every facade cracks. The office changed quietly in the days that followed. People moved differently, spoke differently, glanced differently. Those subtle shifts were more satisfying than any confrontation I could have staged. I became aware of their recognition not just in looks, but in the rhythm of the office, the way printers hummed, the way keyboards clicked, the way conversations paused as people subconsciously remembered the balance had shifted. The environment itself seemed to bend slightly toward fairness, as though the building remembered, even if only for a moment, who had the courage to expose the truth. Then came the official acknowledgment. They asked me to lead a new Ethics and Equity Committee. The very same executives who had whispered about me behind closed doors, who had once labeled me too confrontational or too ambitious, now looked at me with a mix of respect, wariness, and something almost like admiration. "You've got leadership instincts, Ayana," they said. "The company needs your perspective." Sevens. I almost laughed. Not a loud laugh, not a mocking one, but that quiet, private kind of laugh that settles in your chest and spreads warmth into your bones. But instead, I kept my voice calm, steady, and precise. "Perspective is just experience you didn't want to listen to before," I said. And it was true. Every late night, every erased name, every ignored suggestion, it all became perspective, a lens through which the company could now see clearly, whether they wanted to or not. Accepting the role wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't a performance. It was measured, intentional, deliberate. I accepted because it was an opportunity to shape more than just my own path, to influence the culture that had tried to erase me, to create accountability in the systems that rewarded deceit and punished integrity. It was about ensuring that the ripples I had started didn't fade, that they became currents that reshaped the office quietly but irrevocably. As I walked through the hallways after the announcement, I felt a new energy in the air. People's eyes lingered a little longer, their conversations softened, respect threaded through the whispers and small smiles. The office had shifted, Not with noise, not with drama, but with subtle, undeniable force. And I realized, in that moment, that real power isn't loud or flashy. It is the quiet recalibration of the world around you, the invisible nudge that changes how people see themselves, how they see others, how they see justice. I sat at my desk later, alone, listening to the hum of the lights, the faint buzz of the HVAC, the distant rattle of a printer. Every sound carried a new weight, a reminder of the shift that had taken place. I allowed myself a small, private smile. The job wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the foundation had changed. The trajectory had shifted. And I, finally, had the perspective, the patience, and the precision to guide the current toward a future that didn't just favor me, but honored fairness, truth, and integrity. Not for them, but for every woman who'd ever been called ungrateful for asking what she deserved. Not for the whispers that said I was too ambitious, too loud, too visible, too everything they didn't want to see in a young Black woman climbing a corporate ladder built to exclude people like me. I did it for the interns who stayed late, unnoticed, building presentations, spreadsheets, and strategies that no one acknowledged. For the colleagues whose ideas were taken and rebranded. For the women who learned early that ambition was a liability and courage a crime. I did it for all of us, quietly, deliberately, without the fanfare that the world expects, but with an impact that would echo far beyond the walls of this office. Weeks passed. Time itself seemed to stretch and settle differently. Atlanta's heat pressed against the glass windows every afternoon, making the skyline shimmer like liquid gold, distorting the familiar streets below into a kind of molten, dreamlike rhythm. The city moved on its own pace, indifferent yet alive, as if it too recognized that something fundamental had shifted. Inside, I sat in my new office, a space smaller than Brad's sprawling corner empire, yet cleaner, simpler, freer. The walls were bare, except for the faint outline where a motivational poster had once been. The carpet smelled faintly of polish. The air hummed softly with the ventilation system, and I could hear the distant chatter of colleagues in other wings, the subtle click of keyboards, the rhythmic hum of printers. A single plant sat by the window, its leaves catching the sunlight, a quiet testament to life, resilience, and patience. My desk didn't creak under the weight of my presence. It felt solid, grounded, ready to hold not just files, but ideas, strategies, and the weight of truth. My computer screen glowed softly, its screensaver flashing a simple reminder. Numbers don't lie. That phrase had never been so profound. Every spreadsheet, every payroll audit, every internal report became a reflection of integrity, accountability, and the careful balance between discretion and exposure. Every file I opened reminded me that power isn't about the corner office, the fancy title, or the visible authority one assumes is necessary. Power is quieter than that. Power is control. Control of truth, of information, of the narratives that define perception. It's knowing which stories to amplify, which to withhold, which to expose, and which to let burn quietly, unseen but transformative. It's the skill of shaping reality not through noise, but through precision, observation, and timing. And in that calm mastery, I realized that my victories, every carefully timed email, every piece of undeniable evidence, every subtle recalibration of the office culture, weren't mine alone. They were part of a larger movement, a quiet rebellion against systems that had trained women like me to shrink, to apologize, to fade, I looked out the window often, watching the heat shimmer over rooftops, the sun casting gold onto glass and asphalt alike. Each reflection reminded me that even in the smallest details, like the tilt of a window pane, the way light falls across a desk, the gentle sway of my office plant, there is evidence of change. The office I once feared, where I was erased, dismissed, and overlooked, had become a space where influence, patience, and clarity mattered more than intimidation, titles, or politics. It had become a testament to what can be achieved when one refuses to be silent, when one learns to wield truth like a scalpel rather than a hammer. And in that quiet, measured office, I understood fully. Power is patience. Power is discernment. Power is the ability to see, to wait, and to act only when the moment is fully prepared. My reflection in the glass was steady, my breathing even, my hands calm on the keyboard. The ripple I had created had settled into currents that moved invisibly but inexorably through the office. And I sat there, not celebrating with noise or fanfare, but in a profound, enduring satisfaction, knowing that this kind of change, quiet, precise, unshakable, lasts far longer than the temporary clamor of recognition or applause. There were nights I stayed late again, not because I had to, but because I liked the calm after everyone left. The hum of the vents, the reflection of fluorescent light against the polished floor, the ghost of who I used to be, still sitting there in that cubicle, still doubting if she'd ever be enough. Sometimes I'd look at that ghost and whisper, "Sevens, you did it, girl. You did it without shouting." Sevens, but there's a cost to power, even when it's righteous. People started to distance themselves. Friends from work stopped inviting me out. They said I'd changed, that I was different now. Sevens, maybe I was. When you stand your ground long enough, you stop fitting into rooms that were built for your silence. One Friday, I went back to my mother's house. She was on the porch, shelling peas, the same way she always did when she was thinking. She looked up at me and said, "Sevens, you look lighter." "Sevens." I smiled. "I feel heavier, actually." "Sevens." She chuckled. "That's what truth does, baby. It don't set you free. It makes you strong enough to carry what you know." Sevens. Her words stayed with me that night. Because she was right. Freedom isn't clean. It's complicated. It leaves marks. But it also builds armor. A month later, a recruiter reached out, a role in New York. Director of People Strategy. Double the salary. Triple the respect. I took it. When I left the Atlanta office for the last time, I walked past the break room, past the glass conference room where it all began. The same place they once said my attitude wasn't leadership material. The chairs were different now. New faces. But the same hum of ambition, the same fluorescent light bouncing off polished glass. As I reached the elevator, I heard someone whisper behind me, "Sevens, that's her. The one who sent the file." "Sevens." I didn't turn around. I just smiled, soft, proud, precise. When the doors closed, I caught my reflection. Steady eyes. Calm breath. A woman who had rewritten her story, line by line, paycheck by paycheck. Now, when people ask what happened, I tell them this. Sevens. They called me too assertive. But precision is what rebuilt me. Sevens. And if they listen closely, under the calm tone of my voice, sevens, they might hear it. Sevens. The quiet thunder of a woman who learned how to turn silence into strategy. You won't believe what happens next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. The office was a ghost town that night. The hum of the HVAC was louder than usual, the fluorescent lights flickering as if nervous. I paced slowly, letting my heels click softly against the polished floor. Click, 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 each step a metronome for my racing thoughts. Every desk, every swivel chair, every monitor staring back at me felt like a witness to what I was about to do. I set up the server room the way I liked it. No one around, doors locked, systems humming steadily. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint tang of burnt coffee, remnants of the daytime hustle. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised but calm. This wasn't just a click. It was the opening of a door that had been closed for too long. I checked the encrypted drive one last time. Project Mirror. My life's work distilled into lines of numbers, highlighted discrepancies, unreported bonuses, every gender gap laid bare. The weight of it in my hands was tangible, though the lipstick-sized drive looked innocuous, small, unassuming. I leaned back, listening to the office in silence. The hum of the vents, the faint drip from a leaky pipe somewhere down the hall, the soft shuffle of a janitor's footsteps far away. My pulse was a steady drum now, my breath measured. I thought about every late night, every time I stayed invisible, every dismissive smile I endured. It had all led to this moment. I sat at the console, fingers poised above the keys. I ran through the sequence in my head. Upload to every executive inbox, auto forward to the CEO, legal, compliance, no signature, no message, just data, truth. The room seemed to shrink around me. The fluorescent lights cast long, sharp shadows across the server racks. I could feel the electricity in the air, subtle, waiting. It was almost like the building itself was holding its breath. My phone buzzed, silent notifications from the network team. I ignored them. I wanted nothing to break the rhythm, the calm, the tension I had built carefully. This was my moment. I could feel it in my bones. I clicked enter and watched the progress bar crawl, each percentage point a heartbeat. 10, 25, 50, 75, 99, and then, finally, completed. Sent, delivered. The digital equivalent of a whisper that would soon roar across the office. I didn't scream. I didn't celebrate. I just leaned back, letting the quiet envelop me. My reflection in the monitor glowed softly, a face tired but alive, eyes sharp, lips pressed into a line that held both satisfaction and restraint. I closed my eyes and listened. The building, the city beyond, even my own heartbeat, every sound seemed magnified in this pregnant silence. For a moment, I imagined tomorrow. The office buzzing in confusion, whispers bouncing off glass walls, the way people would glance at me differently, the energy shifting without a single word from me. Anticipation wrapped itself around me, tight and electric. I stood and walked slowly through the empty aisles, feeling the faint echo of my heels, imagining the reactions, hearing the stifled gasps, the sudden realization in voices I would never hear directly. Every detail, every hesitation, every misstep they had taken to dismiss me would now be exposed. Back at my desk, I took a sip of lukewarm tea, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. Outside the window, Atlanta's skyline slept under a deep indigo night, lights flickering like fireflies. I allowed myself a private smile. They thought they controlled the narrative. They had no idea. I thought about Brad, The smug little smile, the casual arrogance, the way he had believed women like me wouldn't bite. Tomorrow, that illusion would shatter. And yet, I stayed calm. I let the weight of it settle. There was no gloating, no triumph just yet. Only the anticipation of watching the truth take its course. The city, the office, the fluorescent-lit hallways, they all became instruments, and I was about to conduct the most satisfying symphony of quiet justice. I checked my phone again. Already, a few curious notifications. People had begun to notice a ripple, a subtle stir in the system. I didn't reply. I didn't react. That wasn't my role anymore. I was the composer. They were the audience. I returned to the window, the cool glass pressing lightly against my cheek. My reflection merged with the city lights. I whispered to myself, soft but certain, "This is what happens when precision meets patience. This is what happens when silence becomes strategy." Minutes stretched like hours. Every sound, the low drone of servers, the distant traffic, the faint echo of my own breathing, became part of the waiting game. The anticipation wrapped itself around me like a velvet cloak, heavy and thrilling. I closed my eyes, thinking about all the women I'd ever worked with, all the people overlooked, underestimated, silenced. This was more than me now. This was a statement, a lesson, a ripple that would become a wave. And in that quiet, in that calm, I felt it. The power of truth, slow and deliberate, waiting to unfurl. When I finally opened my eyes, the server lights blinked softly. The data had been sent, delivered. The echoes would begin any second now. The city outside remained still, oblivious to the storm about to break within these walls. I allowed myself one last deep breath. Then, with a small, private smile, I whispered again, "Tomorrow, they'll remember my name, and they'll never forget it. If you've ever been overlooked or underpaid, this part's for you. And if you feel that, hit that." Sevens. Morning light cut through the blinds like sharp fingers, painting stripes across my desk. I sipped my coffee slowly, deliberately, letting the aroma anchor me. Outside, Atlanta stirred, cars humming, distant sirens, the subtle rhythm of a city waking. But inside the office, time felt suspended. Something had shifted overnight. I could feel it. The whispers started softly, first near the elevators, then around the break room, then in small clusters near desks. People leaning in, catching eyes, breaking off conversations mid-sentence when they saw me walk by. Not fear exactly. Something heavier, recognition, awe, perhaps a twinge of guilt. I smiled faintly, controlled, observing. Patience was still my weapon. Let the ripple grow. Let it become a wave before it crashes. By 10 a.m., the first meeting began, a hastily called leadership huddle. The CEO, sharp and formal, entered, glancing around like she was hunting for something, or someone. Her gaze lingered on me longer than it should. Brad's absence was evident. Whispers of his mutual separation had already spread. I kept my face calm. My heart was steady, but the satisfaction ran deep, a slow burn. Slides clicked. Updates were given. I listened, silent. Every sentence, every glance, every hesitation, it all confirmed what I already knew. The truth had power. Numbers didn't lie, and my numbers had spoken. Later, An executive approached me cautiously, a thin smile plastered over uncertainty. Ayana, we appreciate your insight. Sevens, I nodded, measured. Perspective is always useful, I said softly. My voice didn't quiver, didn't apologize, didn't over-explain. It just was. By midday, HR was in a frenzy. The payroll discrepancies were being audited. Emails were flying, executives scrambling to explain anomalies that had existed for years. The office energy shifted from casual productivity to tense electricity. Every footstep, every printer beep, every faint chuckle now carried weight. People began to notice how I moved through the office, not aggressively, not confrontational, but present. My calm confidence created its own gravity. Conversations halted as I passed, eyes tracking, whispers trailing. A few of my colleagues, those I'd quietly supported or watched over the years, dared small smiles. The kind that said, "Thank you," without words. Lunch hour, I found a quiet corner and watched the reflection of the office in the glass. The place had changed, subtly but undeniably. The hum of ambition now carried respect. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed less oppressive, more like illumination. And then came the emails. From the CEO directly. Sevens. Effective immediately. Leadership changes are underway. A comprehensive audit is in progress. Your vigilance is noted. Sevens. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That acknowledgment was enough. By late afternoon, a meeting was called. This time, for me. The CEO, legal head, and a handful of senior executives waited. I walked in, steady, precise. No hesitation, no defensiveness, just presence. Ayana, the CEO began, eyes sharp but tinged with admiration. Your actions have highlighted critical gaps in our processes. We want you to lead a new ethics and equity committee. Since I nodded, calm. I'd be honored to contribute. Sevens. No applause. No theatrics. But in that quiet acknowledgement, I felt it, the power of precision, patience, and truth. After the meeting, I walked through the hallways that once felt like cages. Chairs, desks, and glass walls. Now they reflected not my invisibility, but my influence. People's whispers followed, small shifts in behavior, subtle acknowledgement. They didn't have to say my name. They knew. Brad? Gone. Rumor had it he was given a generous severance package, escorted quietly from the office. No dramatic confrontation. No tantrum. Just gravity catching up with arrogance. I returned to my desk and sat, alone for a moment, listening to the office hum. Printers, phones, soft murmur of voices, the gentle click of keyboards. Everything familiar, yet irrevocably different. I allowed myself a breath, slow and deep. Relief? Perhaps? Satisfaction? Definitely. Pride. Quiet. Measured. I had not shouted. I had not demanded. I had delivered truth, patiently, precisely, and watched it ripple outward. Weeks passed. The office adapted. Policies were rewritten. Leadership recalibrated. Equity became more than a memo. It became action. My reflection in the glass no longer carried doubt. It carried power. Not the corner office kind, but the enduring, unshakable kind. And me? I thrived quietly. I accepted the role with the Ethics and Equity Committee, knowing that my victories weren't mine alone. They were for the people who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. Every decision I made, every recommendation, carried weight, subtle, firm, effective. Sometimes, late at night, when the office was empty and the hum of the vents filled the silence, I would sit at my desk, look out at the Atlanta skyline, and think about every step, the erased name, the stolen work, the long nights. And I'd whisper to the ghost of the employee I used to be. You did it. You were precise. You were relentless. And now, they know who Ayana Brooks is. The office would never sound the same again. Not the printers, not the phones, not the low murmur of fake purpose. Now there was a new rhythm. Quiet, measured, respectful. No one ever mentioned my name in the company memo. But they didn't need to. Everyone knew. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every careful step, the ripple of my actions had become a current too strong to ignore. And in that current, I moved forward, steady, calm, unshakable. A woman who had rewritten her story, not with noise, not with anger, but with precision, patience, and undeniable truth. They called me too assertive, too ambitious, too much. I smiled quietly. I was exactly enough. Because precision, when underestimated, is the sharpest form of power there is. The sun rises differently when you've lived through silence and walked out the other side. I wake to Atlanta mornings with a clarity that didn't exist before. The streets are alive, cars humming, birds cutting through the low city hum like punctuation, and I breathe in differently. Every inhale carries awareness, every exhale, acceptance. I think back often to that first meeting, conference room lights dim just enough to hide someone's theft, just enough to make me doubt myself. I remember standing there, invisible in plain sight, watching my work, my effort, my hours of late nights be presented as someone else's initiative. I remember feeling small, a footnote in my own story. And yet, in that quiet humiliation, I found the kernel of something powerful. Observation, patience, strategy. Silence became my teacher. Waiting became my ally. And numbers, oh, the numbers. They became my voice. Every dollar misallocated, every bonus unearned, every gender gap carefully ignored, they spoke when I learned how to listen. I've learned that revenge doesn't need a shout. It doesn't require theatrics. It doesn't need the spotlight. Precision, patience, and truth are louder than any cry for attention. They echo quietly, insidiously, persistently, until the world shifts around you. I walk through offices now, and I see it. The subtle changes in people's posture, the careful glances, the respect in the way they hold space for someone they once overlooked. That ripple, started by one encrypted file in the quiet hours of the night, has grown. It moves through hallways, conference rooms, even elevators. The current is subtle, invisible at first, but undeniable. I reflect on Brad, not with anger, not with joy. I reflect with a certain gravity. He had power. He had position. He thought authority came from title, from the polished image, from who could bend who to their will. But authority without integrity is a house built on sand. And sand shifts. Gravity always wins. I also reflect on myself. Ayana Brooks, the girl who stayed late, who whispered to herself, who carried a lipstick-sized drive like a secret talisman. I am the sum of every decision I made when no one was watching. I am the voice of the overlooked. I am the quiet thunder that teaches patience, precision, and courage. There's a weight to knowing what you've done. It's not light. It presses against your chest, against your bones, reminding you of the nights you stayed, the moments you doubted, the times you whispered to the ghost of yourself. Power comes with a cost. Sometimes friends drift. Sometimes colleagues avert their eyes. Sometimes the world assumes you've changed, but it isn't change. It's evolution. I've evolved. And in evolving, I've learned something essential. Strength isn't measured by volume. It's measured by impact, by the ripples left behind, by the change you create without asking permission. Sometimes, I revisit the server room in my memory. The hum of the machines, the flicker of fluorescent lights, the quiet click of my heels. I relive the moment I pressed send. I savor the anticipation. And I remember that what I did wasn't just for me, it was for every person who had been quieted, underestimated, erased. The office, now, hums differently. It's not the hum of empty ambition. It's the hum of awareness, of accountability, of respect earned, not demanded. My footsteps are lighter now, my reflection steadier, my breath calmer. And in that calm, I know I am whole. I sometimes visit my old cubicle, empty, familiar, ghostly, and I imagine the ghost of the old Ayana sitting there. I whisper softly, "You did it. You were precise. You were patient. You made them see." And I think she smiles, quiet, knowing the truth. She was never invisible. She was merely waiting for the right moment to be heard. I think about the women who come to me now, seeking guidance. Young professionals, underestimated, struggling with voices that refuse to hear them. I tell them one thing, and one thing only. Learn the power of precision. Learn the value of patience. Learn that silence is not submission, it is strategy. I think about the city outside, Atlanta glittering in the afternoon sun. It feels alive, aware, like it witnessed the subtle shifts along with me. And I feel gratitude for the quiet nights, the stolen moments, the weight of my own restraint, for the moments that allowed me to shape reality with the truth as my tool. I reflect on power, and I realize it is not about the office, the title, the corner window, or even the committee I now lead. Power is the ability to shift the world around you quietly, deliberately, with clarity and truth. It's the ability to stand when everyone else assumes you'll fall. And in that reflection, I find peace. Not the shallow, temporary kind, but the deep, rooted kind that comes from knowing you've honored yourself, your values, and the silent witnesses of your journey. I am Ayana Brooks. I am precise. I am patient. I am deliberate. I am heard. And if you listen closely, under the calm tone of my voice, you might hear it, the quiet thunder of someone who turned erasure into authority, doubt into strategy, and silence into victory. Every late night, every erased name, every overlooked effort, it wasn't wasted. It was the blueprint, the architecture of a quiet revolution. And now, as I look out over the skyline, I know revenge doesn't roar. It ripples. It teaches. It transforms. And it lasts. The office will never sound the same again. Neither will I. Yins. I am whole. I am precise. I am unstoppable. And that, my friends, is the power of patience, persistence, and the courage to claim what is rightfully yours. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this story. If it spoke to you, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us who we are.